Carroll, Iowa. No matter what part of the country you're in, you guys are famous. And when I was asked to help kick off your relay, I said, yes, I want to be part of what's number one. Success breeds success, and you guys are number one, and it's an honor to be here tonight. I want to thank Dr. Hill for introducing me, and there's so many people that make something like this possible, and I want to thank the sponsors, and there's a whole list, and I encourage you to look at who is sponsoring this event. And number one, in terms of sponsorship, that you have 2 platinum sponsors, and I want to thank both of them, the McFarland Clinics, Carroll Physicians, and also the St. Anthony Allegiant Cancer Center that Dr. Hill's at. If it weren't for leadership in events like this from the sponsors, it'd be difficult, although you guys could probably carry it out without sponsors. But thanks to all the sponsors, not just the platinum, but all of the sponsors. And I want to say that I am here tonight not to tell my story. I'm here tonight to be able to represent the story of cancer survivors. It's their story that I'm honored to tell. It's a story we wish we didn't have to tell. As you know, cancer affects nearly every family. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. This year, approximately 1.6 million Americans will be diagnosed with cancer. Nearly 600,000 will lose their life to this disease. We've made a lot of progress. There are over 13 million cancer survivors in the United States, but we still have progress to make. And it's because of you and the commitment you're making to help raise funds that will go to research, that will go to studies that will determine how we can prevent cancer, that will go to studies that learn how we can better treat cancer, and that will also provide services in cancer centers in Carroll and around the country that will provide quality care for cancer survivors and also for their families and for those who live on. And it's the work you're doing, raising this money, that will allow us to have a world with less cancer and more birthdays. So thank you for taking time to do this important work. I really applaud you. Thanks. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some journeys that we did. And as Dr. Hill said, I've had just the tremendous honor to accompany cancer survivors on some journeys of a lifetime to mountains that look almost as beautiful as these mountains. Now is Katie here still? I met Katie from Carroll, Iowa, senior at Carroll Kemper, right? Made this beautiful version of the Himalayas. This is Mount Everest. It's the tallest one, you can tell. Yes. And you're going to be invited to plant some prayer flags here before the evening's over. But thank you, Katie. That is, I've never given a talk with something like that. So, how does one decide to take cancer survivors to Mount Everest to begin with? So, short version, there's 2 parts of the background. Number one, I was in Nepal 10 years ago on a mountain climbing trip on my own. Had no altruistic purpose. I was a mountain climber. If you're a mountain climber, you want to go visit those mountains like that, and so you just take up and you go to Nepal. And I was there with 5 other mountain climbers I didn't know from Adam and one Eve, and we climbed up to tremendous peaks, and for me it was about going further, farther, faster, higher, and just being part of this tremendous journey. But as you're journeying through Nepal, it teaches you things you didn't even know you were going there to learn. And I did have a wonderful mountain climbing trip, and it was just incredible, the journey. But as you're journeying up the mountains, you realize that there's more than just climbing mountains. And when you're in Nepal, in the mountains, and back then, 10 years ago, we had no cell phones, satellites, webs, blogging, and you're just out in nature with simple folks living simple mountain lives. And one of the memories that is always with me as I'm journeying up the trail is I've got this backpack with stuff. And I've got so much stuff in my backpack. And I've got extra coats and extra hats and extra everything because I want to be prepared. And this stuff I'm carrying on my back as I'm going up through the mountains with extra coats and hats. And you're going through villages where they have no coats and hats. And you quickly realize that the stuff we carry on our back is not only unnecessary, but is a burden. And so you give away your stuff. And as you're journeying up through the mountains, you realize that much of what we carry with us in our minds over those weeks is stuff, and it's not only unnecessary, it's a burden. And you get the opportunity when you're up in the mountains for several weeks to release that burden. And you get the opportunity to realize that climbing a mountain is less about a physical accomplishment, and it's more about opening yourself up to what the mountain and the people can teach you, mind, body, and spirit. And I knew that one day it would be tremendous to take a group of people to the mountains of Nepal and allow them to experience this. But it would not have been April 2011 if it weren't for this guy. So I don't know if anybody has heard Charlie speak. This is Charlie Whitmack. Charlie was the first Iowan to ever summit Mount Everest. So Charlie's life changed a few years ago when his wife was diagnosed with cancer. And his wife, Kate, is doing fine, but as many, many of you in this room know, when you're told you have cancer, it changes your life. And one of the things it can do is it can encourage one to realize that maybe we're not going to be here forever, and that maybe we're not going to be here even as long as we thought we were going to be. And perhaps if we have dreams, today's a good day to start living those dreams. And Kate and Charlie had dreams. Kate had a dream to be a writer, and she's now written and published her first novel. And Charlie had a dream since he was 13 years old to do what he calls the World Triathlon. It's a simple little journey. I was talking with one of the survivors about a triathlon that she's planning. Well, Charlie's triathlon isn't about paddling a boat across the lake and doing a three-legged race, although that's a great triathlon. But Charlie's triathlon was to swim the length of the Thames River in England, get all the way down to the English Channel, turn left, and swim across the English Channel, get out of the water in France, jump on his bicycle, ride his bicycle across Europe and Asia to Kathmandu, get off his bicycle, run from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp, and then climb to the top of Mount Everest. And he had this dream, not just to prove that he's the studliest Iowan there is, but to encourage others to dream big and to actualize your dreams. He had no idea whether he could do this. But how do you know if you can do it unless you try? And he wanted to do it not just to prove what he could accomplish, but to bring others along with him, metaphorically and physically. So he and I got together, and we had known each other because of my mountain climbing and the work that I had done with cancer survivors. And we came up with the idea of I would take a group of cancer survivors, and I'd meet him at Everest Base Camp as he's getting ready for the final part of his world triathlon to climb to the top of Mount Everest. So we decided to do it. I'll tell you the short version. The long version was almost 9 months went by without me doing anything about it except saying I was going to do it. And I just want to tell you about the power of journalism. I was at an event in December of 2010, and a reporter came up to me and said, "Dr. Deming, I heard you're going to take a group of cancer survivors to Everest Base Camp. Is that true?" And I said to Lynn Hicks, who writes the Biz Buzz, "Yes." And it was in the paper the next day, and I was committed, and it made life so much easier once you're committed. And so once you're committed, you can do anything. How do you decide who to take with you to Everest Base Camp? Well, the first thing I knew is that it would be a bigger, deeper,
better, richer experience for everyone if it included cancer survivors, not just cancer survivors who could afford to go, but anyone. So I set aside funding so that I could take anyone regardless of their abilities financially. As it turns out, 10 of the 14 survivors had never been out of the country, had never had passports, would never have dreamed of doing something like this. And the other thing is that the survivors who went, they're not athletes, they're not mountain climbers. They're not on this journey in spite of their cancer. They're on this journey because of their cancer. They would not have taken on this journey if it weren't for the courage and confidence that they gained through their cancer journey that led them to say, I have no idea if I can climb a mountain, but I am willing to reach for something that's beyond the grasp of what I know I can attain. And it's only by doing that, by reaching for something you don't know you can attain, that you get a feel for what you really can accomplish in life. So let me introduce you to the cast of characters that went to Everest. Justin. Justin was the young pup, 27. 9 months before this, he had a tumor the size of a racquetball removed from his brain. He had 6 weeks of radiation and a year of chemotherapy. Teresa's a radiation therapist. She treats cancer patients. She's done that for over 20 years. 9 months before this, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in each of her breasts, had both of her breasts removed, had 4 months of chemotherapy, had reconstruction. Oh, and by the way, Teresa has an artificial hip, and 8 years ago she had her colon removed for Crohn's disease. And she's not an athlete. And she was 3 months out from treatment and said, I want to reach. I want to reach. Bobby was the only person I've ever diagnosed with cancer in the locker room at the YMCA. He says, hey doc, feel this. A lymph node in his neck. It turned out he had tonsil cancer. We darn near killed him with chemotherapy and radiation therapy. He was 1 year out when he said, yep, I want to go. Amelia was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 24. Bilateral mastectomy, reconstruction, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. Lynette, oh, what can we say about Lynette? Lynette is amazing. Lynette was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 32 when she was breastfeeding her son Parker. She had surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and was cancer-free for 3 years. Recurrence, more surgery, more chemo, more radiation, and was cancer-free for 2 years. More surgery, more chemo, more radiation. She was out of radiation 1 month, still taking chemotherapy when she signed up on this journey. Left 8-year-old Parker at home with grandpas and grandma, took husband Chad with her, and Lynette works for the American Cancer Society. That's her day job. Her real job's being mom and wife, and incredible survivor. Karen, breast cancer survivor. Kathy, 52 years old, has neurofibromatosis, has had about 30 surgeries in her lifetime, lots of tumors removed, malignant tumor removed from her left arm, came back, more surgery, more radiation, her left arm doesn't work very well. Oh, and she's got an artificial knee. And she's afraid of heights. Gail, he was the old man on this trip, the Everest trip. 64, prostate cancer, surgery, came back, radiation. Lynn is a mental health counselor and breast cancer survivor. Brandon spent 6 months in a bone marrow transplant unit receiving a donor transplant for AML, a type of leukemia. Peggy, a physical therapist and breast cancer survivor. Trace, police officer, member of the SWAT team. Hodgkin's disease, bunch of chemotherapy, stage 4 Hodgkin's disease, recurrence, more chemotherapy, stem cell transplant, radiation, cancer-free for 6 months, recurrence, more chemotherapy, radiation therapy. He was 9 months cancer-free when he said, "Doc, I want to go." Stacy, breast cancer survivor, also a bit of a rocky road, has been cancer-free for 3 years. And Linda was the oldest woman on the Everest trip, 56 years old, the principal of Albia High School, Hodgkin's disease survivor. And when we were in Nepal, she did an assembly for her high school in Albia via cell phone through the PA system. So we got our group together and we prepared for 3 months. And we worked out and we prepared physically. We also had lectures about Nepal and the culture, and we had talks on Hinduism and Buddhism, because when we went to Nepal, we wanted to be prepared, not just physically to climb a mountain, but be prepared emotionally and philosophically and spiritually to accept the gifts that Nepal were going to bring us. So we had hikes during the weekends, and we all got together then, and we left Des Moines, and we flew from Des Moines to Chicago, Chicago to Abu Dhabi, Abu Dhabi to Kathmandu. We arrived at Kathmandu, literally halfway around the world, and we spent a couple days touring Kathmandu. Wonderful city, Buddhist sites and Hindu sites, and just sights and sounds and smells that you would never see anywhere. And we bonded some more as a group. We got used to the time change, and it just had an amazing time in Kathmandu. But then it was time to go on to Everest. So we went out to the little airport in Kathmandu to fly up into the mountains, and we're flying to this little village called Lukla, L-U-K-L-A. If you Google Lukla, it'll come up, world's most dangerous airport. Have you ever seen it like an airplane land on an aircraft carrier? Well, the Lukla airport is about the length of an aircraft carrier. But when an airplane lands on an aircraft carrier, you know, it's got this hook and it catches a cable, and if it doesn't stick the landing, it just sort of keeps going, takes off, and gets a redo. Well, there's no redos in Lukla, because if you don't stick the landing, you actually run into a huge mountain. So you land going into the mountain, and then you take off by just turning around and flying off the cliff. The runway's not quite long enough to get you lift, so you just hope you're going fast enough that when you get off the cliff, you kind of fall a little bit, but then the whole physics of aerodynamics, it works. So we get to Nepal, into the mountains, and you fly into Lukla, and you're at 10,000 feet again. And this was the first time, the emotional impact of being up in the mountains. So we had 14 cancer survivors and 15 caregivers, and we arrived at Lukla. And from that point up, we're going to be going up for 9 days. And there's no motorized vehicles from this point on. And it is just tremendously beautiful. And when we got there, it was like, oh my God, this is the day we said we were going to arrive. We're halfway around the world, and we are going to embark on this journey. And it was the first time I had a thought that came to me 1,000 times during that next 2 weeks. And I remembered back the last time I was in Lukla, which was 10 years before. And I remembered how that was all about fulfilling a dream of mine. And this time, it was about giving birth to dreams. And the difference between fulfilling your own personal dream and giving birth to dreams is just tremendous. And what you guys are doing is giving birth to dreams. So, we journeyed. As we got started, I knew that it would be important to have a rhythm to each day. And each day we began with a Sherpa, one of our guides from the mountains, that would awaken us each morning with either a rustle on the tent door or a knock on the lodge and a cup of tea and a greeting of Namaste. And Namaste is a greeting that recognizes the divine within each of us. And we would have our cup of tea, and then we would assemble at 7 o'clock for breakfast. And every morning, before breaking bread and sharing breakfast, one of the cancer survivors would give a heartfelt thanksgiving for us being there. Thanking everyone and everything that had made it possible for us to be there. Thanking all those that had brought the food, that had prepared it for us. Thanking those back home that were doing our jobs so that we could be there. And also praying that we would have the strength to get through the day and the wisdom to learn what the mountain was going to teach us. And then we would go out into the courtyard or the mountainside, and before starting the hike that day, I took along with us our yoga instructor, and she would lead us in some yoga before beginning our journey. It was more about just getting together and kind of stretching a little bit and getting our minds in the right place. And then before journeying, I would read a reflection from a book called To Bless the Space Between Us by John O'Donohue, that again recognized a higher purpose. And Lori talked about why Carroll County and Carroll has such a successful Relay for Life. And one of the reasons is you realize there's a higher purpose to what you're doing. And we realized every moment of the day that there was a higher purpose, and that higher purpose really can provide tremendous strength as you're journeying up the mountain. So we began the journey, and let me just come along with me to Nepal. And this is a beautiful place, and you are on a trail going up through the highest mountains in the world. And as we journeyed up the mountains, we had so many emotions. I mean, there is joy and exhilaration and camaraderie and companionship. There is nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. There is ecstasy. There is bliss and blisters, and that's just the first 10 minutes. And every time you come around a corner, you are just struck by the majesty of the Creator. And as we journeyed, how do you get a bunch of people up a mountain that aren't athletes going up to 18,000 feet? With a few bridges you might have to cross along the way. If you have a fear of heights, that could be a little challenging. You know, and you get up the mountain by a combination of hugs, lots and lots of hugs, a few kicks in the butt, sprinkled liberally with antibiotics and high-altitude medicine, and laughter, and fun and games. And this photograph, you know, you see this time and again. This is Justin helping Kathy and Teresa. You don't get up the mountain alone. You don't accomplish much of anything in life alone. Lots of hugs. Lots of hugs. And as we journeyed up the mountain, you get the opportunity to see sights. And you see that people do things differently than we do. People think differently, have different ideas. And if you're the least bit open to introspection, you get the idea that maybe the way we do everything isn't necessarily the right way, and you have the opportunity to grow and really realize that we are part of a big world, and you can learn a lot by the differences that we all have. Justin was a lead singer in a rock band before he got cancer. So we brought along a guitar, 2 tambourines, and a cowbell. And we had the rockinest band in all of the Kunglu. There's Kathy. Again, her left arm doesn't work right. She's got an artificial knee, and she's afraid of heights and not too sure on her feet. And she fell down more times than I can count. I mean, literally. But she got up one more time when she fell down, and she made it to the top with a lot of help from some friends. I love this photograph over to your left. So this is Teresa. Teresa's got an artificial hip. no colon, no breasts, and not an athlete, and having a difficult time. Kathy's 30 surgeries, multiple tumors removed, scared of heights, artificial knee, now doesn't have very good balance. Teresa found early on in the journey that Kathy was the only person on the journey who was slower than she was. And Teresa found incredible strength by helping Kathy on the journey instead of just having somebody help her. And she found early on that you know, helping someone else achieve their dreams is tremendously rewarding, inspiring, and motivating. And so I could show you photographs of Kathy being assisted by Teresa under the watchful eye of our Sherpa. This is Ang Lok Pa and Lynn. Lynn's a cancer survivor and a mental health counselor, and Ang Lok Pa was the only female Sherpa. So Sherpa is a word that means the tribe of people that live up in the mountains between Nepal and Tibet. It also is every one of their last names. So this is Ang Lok Pa Sherpa. The first name of every Sherpa is the day of the week they were born. So there are a lot of Sherpas with the same name. And it's also become synonymous, the word Sherpa, with what they do. They guide and they carry, and so that word has come into our vocabulary. Well, Ang Lok Pa Sherpa was 49, and her husband was the head Sherpa. And most of the Sherpas spoke pretty good English and were our main guides. Ang Lok Pa Sherpa didn't speak such good English, but her smile just said it all. I mean, she said about 2 words, okay, okay. Maybe that's 1 word. But she just this smile. And 2 days before reaching Everest Base Camp, Lynn was really sick. Altitude sickness, bronchitis, so tired, couldn't really hardly stand up, even though we had a rest day that day. And it became clear that she could not go forward. So the main treatment for altitude sickness is to go down the mountain to lower altitude where there's more oxygen, and that usually recovers. So we sent Ang Lok Pa with Lynn down the mountain, and they went down to the village that Ang Lok Pa lives in. And Ang Lok Pa took Lynn into her home and nursed her back to health while we went up the mountain, and also showed her some, participated in some Buddhist ceremonies, was able to be part of some very intimate meals and family gathering, and just really nurtured her back to health. We, meanwhile, went up the mountain, and we went on up to Everest Base Camp. And you can see Everest Base Camp. That last day's journey was really difficult. The trail was very narrow, rocky, with you know, the potential to fall if you're afraid of heights. And it snowed that day. We got up to Everest Base Camp, and the sun started peeking out. And we met up with Charlie Whitmack, who, I mean, unbelievable, on cue. He had gone, swum the English Channel, ridden his bike across Europe and Asia, ran from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp, and we arrived, our band, at the time he's there to greet us. And I remember distinctly when we got together that first day, like months before, he said, this is going to be the plan. But don't promise anybody they're actually going to see me, because I might be climbing the mountain when you guys get up there. Don't promise anybody that you're actually going to see Mount Everest. It might be in clouds for a month. And we just worked out, like, to the minute, you know, that we arrived at base camp. He's there to greet us. We spend time at base camp. He goes up, climbs Mount Everest, and it's like, oh my God, tell me that there's not a God. The next morning, so it got down to about 20 below that night. We're in our little pup tents. The water freezes. We get through the night. The next day, we wake up, and it is sunny and bright. And we had carried with us, I forgot a couple of my props here at the table. We had carried with us about 300